Welcome to Getting Started with Teams Bot Development. We're going to be taking a look at Teams bots, why they matter, and how it fits into our Power Platform projects. It's going to be a very technical session. I'm going to show you how to get started with Teams bots, and by the end of the 45 minutes, I'm going to have you feeling skilled up to go and build a Teams bot and have that taught to Dynamics 365 and Power Automate. So no pressure, but I think it should be an interesting session to get the real technical skills flowing. But before we get carried away and started, I want to thank our sponsors. Without any of these guys, today wouldn't be happening. So ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Promuxo, Redspire, Agilisys and Hitachi, they're the guys who are making everything happen today for the Scottish Summit. So we can't thank them enough. Obviously, there's a little picture of me in the physical event last year before the dreaded C word of COVID. So, and a bit about myself. I run a small team of Dynamics architects and consultants at CRMTS, where we do various Dynamics projects. And for myself, I'm very much what they used to call a hybrid consultant, which is now often an architect, which is half a functional consultant using the different apps that are available to us in the cloud, which is quite a broad array these days, alongside quite technical concepts and development. So I'm a bit of a hand in both. I kind of prefer keeping it to the application consultancy and using the tools that other people have provided us, but I don't mind getting my hands dirty, as we'll see in a second as we get stuck in. And then really what I wanted to go through just before we get stuck into that technical detail is what Teams is all about. Teams for me, initially I think a lot of people have seen Teams as a bit of a chat thing, a bit of doing for meetings, but really it's become more of a last 2 years when I first really started getting into Teams, that Teams is essentially becoming the front window for how businesses collaborate. And that means a front window for how businesses collaborate with apps just as much as they collaborate with each other. And really the way I've described it there is you've got comms, you've got apps, and you've got data. In many ways, I see Teams fulfilling the original ambitions for SharePoint that came before Teams, having proper collaboration spaces where people can interact with each other, but also interact with all the various systems that make up our business or our organization. Organizations now use an array of different systems, and we all know user adoption is the biggest challenge to getting those systems really productive. And really, Teams gives us a way of elevating that. And I can't emphasize enough just how important I think Teams is going to be to anyone involved in the Microsoft ecosystem over the next few years. And really what I wanted to sort of go through is what we're going to use Teams for is, one, finding and connecting people with information, crucially important, the old traditional SharePoint search, but doing some of that through Teams. Teams is then our platform for collaboration, where the area of Teams we probably all know quite well, chat, files, meetings. Then we're going to look at how Teams can launch automation in Power Automate and how it can start triggering off business logic, and how Teams then can connect our collaboration off to our automation. And then finally, we're going to take a look at notifications, how some of our automation can then feed back into Teams and notify our users about different things that are going on, particularly with Teams push notifications, which obviously are a lot better than just people getting emails to alert them to things. What we're going to try and get out of that is twofold, and this is very much how my sort of approach to technology works across the board. Number one, user experience. What do people get out of using Teams? Well, number one for me, I've seen this evolve over the last 2 years. Teams is the first application people use in the morning, last application they use in the day. It essentially replaces Outlook, and it's just as important that we integrate with Teams as it always has been that we integrate with Outlook. Dynamics long-standing veterans all know that well, that Outlook integration was the number one thing that got people into Dynamics back in the double O's. I see Teams integration very much being a similar thing now. And then how do we do it? How do we pull all these different bits together? The cloud offers us loads of apps, loads of functionality, loads of technology, and it's our job to pull all that together into a meaningful whole. And then we look at that from a practical perspective. I've just sketched out there really what I'm going to be going through in this session. Azure is the platform that does everything. Teams is our kind of real world business platform. And then Dynamics 365 and Power Automate has been the elements that we're connecting to from Teams and then using that within Azure. And we're going to go and see that using our bot. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the first section, technical element here. So I'm going to get off the PowerPoint into sharing my screen, and we're going to go through that in Azure to then start creating our very first Teams bot. So we can see a completely fresh instance of Teams here, and this is just waiting for us to build our bot and deploy a bot into it so we can see this in action in Teams. So to get started with that, the first thing I'm going to do is move up here, create myself a new tab in Azure, and create the initial bot service that we're going to use as the container in Azure for our new bot. So for that, I've got a completely fresh subscription of Azure here. The only thing that's in it is a solitary resource group that we're going to use. So the first thing we do is create a brand new resource in Azure, and the resource I'm going to do is a web app bot. And we can then create that here. We've got to give that a few initial details. So for me, SS21 bot. As I said, I'm going to use my existing resource group I created a little bit earlier. I'm going to give it a free pricing scheme because effectively this is going to be a dev proof of concept bot. And then I'm just going to create a brand new app service plan for it. There we go. And then I don't need application insights right now, and then I'm going to create my bot. Now, what this goes away and starts doing is it actually creates a number of different resources in Azure, the app service plan being one of them, but the two main ones that we're really interested in, it's going to go and create me a web app bot. That's effectively the presence in Azure where our bot can then communicate with other services, and we're going to see that in a second, where we can do an initial web chat, but then we can add other channels of communication into things like Teams and potentially other apps in the cloud that allow us to insert bots. What it's also going to do is create as a traditional web app, which is going to be a web application living in the Microsoft cloud, and that's where our bot is effectively running from. So our bot is very much a traditional web app, almost in the old school ASP.NET web app world, but then alongside that a bot service, which is then doing the communication with the other things that we're going to, the other applications where our bot is going to manifest itself. And manifest is a good word, because we'll see that a bit later. So whilst that's just taking place, we can see that up there, so deployment plot, there we go, just finished off. So I can then go to my resource and start setting up my bot. Now the very first thing I want to do is, I said, initially my bot's not going to come much in the way with channels. It's just going to come with a solitary web chat channel, which I'm not really that interested in right now. What I want to do is see it talking with Teams. So I'm going to configure Teams channel. Fortunately, it's very quick. I pick what type of Teams I'm doing, I give it a bit of consent, and I'm on my way. Now, I'm in my sort of web app bot within Azure here. What the first thing I really need to do is get the client ID and the client secret for the app behind the bot. And we see what I was just describing here. We've got the web app bot, but then we've got the linked app service down here. So my first step is to navigate into that linked app service and then pull back my client ID and client secret. So we're going to need to drop that into Visual Studio to start hooking up the code elements of this. So I'm going to jump into configuration down here, and I can pull up my details. So I've got my app ID or client ID and my app secret, or sometimes referred to as my client secret. So I'm going to pop those open, and then I'm going to take these, and now what I'm going to do with these is start taking what Azure has set up for me and hooking it into Visual Studio, because we can see Visual Studio publish into this Azure container. So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio, and then as you see here, I've got my app settings.json, so I've got myself set up a little bit here to get started. First off, my app ID, I need to put that in there. Then join back, I want to go and get my app password as well. So I just need to jump back into the web app there, jump back into configuration, and then go and pull that client secret in the same way. So now what I also need in here is my tenant ID. My bot, the code that lives in Visual Studio that I'm going to publish in Azure, needs to know which tenant of the Microsoft Cloud it's going to be talking to. So my tenant ID needs to go in here. Now for me, my bot's just going to be a single tenant bot. It's going to live within its own Azure. It's going to talk to one tenant of Teams, Dynamics and Power Automate. But there are options around here where you can have a multi-tenant bot, and I might go into them a little bit later on. Now to get my tenant ID, easiest way to do that is jump back into my home of Azure, jump into Azure Active Directory, and then you'll see your tenant ID down there. It does crop up all over in Azure because obviously it's a key part of what we're doing, but that's one easy way of getting out. And I've got my tenant ID there, and I'm almost ready to go. Now, what this then allows me to do is start publishing my code here into Azure. I've got my sort of starter code here, and this is going to be available in GitHub as part of this session. It doesn't do too much initially, we're going to see a little bit, but we're effectively going to take this bot and publish it into Azure so we can start seeing it in action. Now to do that, I need to hit open Visual Studio, jump into publish, and then create myself a new publishing profile. So obviously I'm publishing into a brand new resource. I've just created it 2 seconds ago, so I need to do it into a new profile here. So then I go, alright, well, you're going to do it into a new Azure app service. Are you creating a new one, or are you selecting existing? Well, I've just created in Azure, so I'm using an existing one. And I'm going to create my profile. I'm logged into that same Azure tenant as that same user. so that I can see my subscription, my resource group, see my solitary resource group there, and I can even see my bot. And I can go, brilliant, that's what I want to publish into. And then there we go, it takes a bit of time, but then the OK button pops up. I'm going to publish my code now into that bot. And this is one of the most powerful things about bot development. I can take a block of code here, whether it be one I've pulled up earlier or whether I've made a few changes to it, and just keep publishing it to Azure. You're almost your traditional continuous integration. And it's very easy then to deploy changes and updates to a bot. That does carry some risks for change management and the like, but obviously gives a huge amount of power to implement rapid application development, which is what we're really about here. So that's publishing off to Azure, it's published off to my new bot over there. So into my brand new service that we've created 2 seconds ago, and off it goes. Now, my bot now exists in Azure, it exists in the cloud, it's almost ready to use. Obviously Teams, and my instance Teams, has no knowledge of it yet. It's in Teams is going, oh, I don't know who this bot is. So what I do also have to do is take the presence of the bot that I've just created now and sort of deploy it into Teams. I'm not really deploying anything, I'm just telling Teams it exists at this particular address. But that's then the step I need to do to get my bot and see it doing stuff in Teams. Now, so if I shrink that away, we're done with that. The way we do that is we compile, and this is true for a lot of Teams apps, not just bots, we compile what's called a manifest file where we define what our bot is going to go away and do. And what I've done, you don't have to do it like this, but what I've done is include that as a folder in my Visual Studio project down here under manifest. So I can pull that one open and I've got my manifest.json. Used to be XML was all the rage, JSON's pretty much taken over its mantle now. So a lot of these kind of config files in Azure, manifest files, tend to be in a JSON format, and I can see my bot in here. Now, obviously I've done a few little bits here earlier to sort of set the scene up on this one, but again, there's a big thing that I need my bot ID in here again, and I need that over and over again. So I'm going to go and pull that from my app settings, get my bot ID, which is my web app ID, pull that up again, and then insert that into my manifest JSON. So I'm going to, boom, there we go. And then, because that's effectively the app ID for Teams as an app, that each app we deploy to Teams has the idea it can have multiple bots in it. So I've got my bot defined here, and I need my bot ID in there as well. Because for me, my team app ID, my bot ID is going to be one and the same. I'm keeping it nice and simple. And then we're pretty much ready to go. So then that pops that in there. There's a lot of other details in here. I probably should kind of, do more of, but really for your major one, that's really what you need to be doing. And what that then gives us is a folder in here that is ready to be compiled into a zip file that we then upload into Teams. So if I open that folder up in File Explorer, you can see where I've done this a bit before. I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to take these 3 files, and these are the 3 files you need for every bot that you, or Teams app you're going to upload in Teams, and you need these as a zip file. When I say the 3 files, the major one is the manifest.json, but really you want to be including some icons in there as well. If you download like the starter pack from Microsoft, you'll get some icons in there, which obviously, generic my new bot icons, or you can then mock up your own ones in 32 pixels and 129 pixels in the format that Microsoft insists on for a new bot in Teams. And then I've got my manifest zip. So what do I do with that? Well, I'll jump back into Teams. So I'm going to jump back into over here, back into Chrome. I've got my sort of blank instance of Teams here. It's not doing anything terribly exciting at the moment, but what I can do is drop down here, jump into more apps, and I get all the apps I can potentially add into Teams. Some of these are very public apps, probably used a few of them in the past for apps that are publicly available in the cloud, but what we also have is upload a customized app, and that's what I want to do now. So upload to Contonzo, good old Contonzo, and then really I'm going to get my manifest file there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in here, it's living in this particular folder here, pop that one in, and then there's my manifest.zip. Now if I've got everything right, this will upload happy days. If there's anything slightest bit wrong in my manifest JSON or anything, it'll have a good complaint and say, oh no, I'm not doing that. But if you're using one that I've largely prepared earlier, you go straight in, and then that's my bot in there. Now, so I can see that in there, it's been built for my org, because it's a bespoke bot we've just built. It's communicating to Azure. Now, so that manifest file, obviously, all it is a JSON file and a couple of images. Really, it's just connecting or introducing the definition of our bot into Teams that then is talking to what we've just done earlier in Azure. Now obviously my bot's now declared in Teams, it doesn't do anything yet, I haven't added it to anything, so my first step is to add it to a team. So what I'm going to do is jump in, find myself a team. I'm going to use clients. What I want is here is I just want clients as a team. Oh, yeah, I should have it to that channel. So I'm going to set up a bot, I'm going to add it to that particular channel, and then that's going to add my brand new bot into that channel. It is now sort of a physical presence in my Teams channel that I can then talk to. I can then raise requests to, and we can see that here. The way most users will interact with that is they'll go, all right, brilliant, what I'm doing at, what am I doing, who am I doing at? Oh, I'm at SSO, which is the name of my bot, which came from the manifest file. And then, what do I do with this? Oh, well, then I've got some commands in here. Now, the name of the bot and the commands all come from that manifest file. So I'm going to, example command, bang, go away and do the example command for me. And then our bot then, doing whatever that command is, then replies to us and says, all right, I've installed in this channel. If we run a command that I recognise, here's the outputs of that command. Now my command is super simple here, it just basically is a kind of traditional echo bot. It says, oh, thanks for running the example action, if that's okay with you, I'm done with it. But what we'll then see as we go through elements here in Visual Studio and Power Automate, how we can turn this and do a lot of other interesting stuff with it. I also have a little command that tells you sort of who you are, just in case you don't know. But it just rattles off your tenant details and your user details. You know, that's sort of starting point where we're getting different commands going on. So that's our bot installed into Teams. We've created it in Azure. We've deployed our custom code into the bot, so it's doing whatever our custom code tells it to do. And now we've added it to a particular channel so we can start seeing it in action. And what we're going to do next is we're then going to start looking at, right, what can we do in that code base? Mostly from my background, how can we talk to Dynamics, get useful information to Dynamics 365 and have the bot giving that information back to us, and then looking at how we can run things in Power Automate so the bot can start automating particularly useful processes and doing that using Power Automate and Flow rather than having everything sitting in our Visual Studio code. And that's what we're going to look at now. Now we've got our bot fully connected into Teams and able to publish from Visual Studio into Azure and see changes happen in real time, we're effectively going to look at rapid application development. We're going to think, right, what does our client need from a bot? What information do we need to bounce back and forth from Teams? Get that into Visual Studio, publish it off and see it happen in real time. Now, given particularly my background, really what I want to see is my bot talking to Dynamics 365 and starting to pull information back from Dynamics or push information into Dynamics, and that's what we're going to look at first. So I've got my Teams view here. What I'm going to first do is bring up Visual Studio, and then I've got the sort of logic of my bot in here. All of this code is available via GitHub. It's a sample project, so we don't need to worry too much about the ins and outs of this, but what I want to focus on immediately is we've got our first little command up there, so my example command. And what that does is it picks up that that's the command that's coming into our Teams bot, and then it says, right, I'm going to go and run this piece of logic here. Now, obviously, coding is a bit debatable how you want to structure things, but the way I've got this going is effectively I've got a list of actions up here that then connect in. So I've got example action there, that goes through to here, and I've got my world's simplest Teams bot action. It says, okay, I'm running the example action for you. I'll finish doing it. Bob's your uncle. Now, really what I'm going to see here is just change this ever so slightly. I'm going to put, say, output here as a bit of a string. So I'm going to say, finish the example action at, and then do a quick now so we can see when this is happening. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it just a little bit of Britishness and put it in British date, format. And there we go. Reply, add a little full stop on the end. And then I'm going to just change what the bot then does with that command when it finishes and put that in there. Dosh. Now, beauty that, I've made a tiny little change, but what I can do is save that, publish that to Azure. So we've got our profile set up as from what we did earlier, and away we go. And effectively that means that, and this is the real beauty for anybody who hasn't done development in Azure, we can just publish it straight off the cloud. There's very little faff, one click publish, effectively continuous integration, and we can see any changes that we're doing effectively in real time. One note whilst that's publishing off, debugging of the bot, there's a way of doing that with a tool that allows you to effectively pass the execution of the bot back from the cloud to your local host, and there's a little article in the GitHub site for this session on how that's done. But that's all done, so I'm going to jump back to Teams. So back in here now, and then beauty of that is going to go, alright, what's my bot? I want to do my example action again. Oh, that's what I can spell. So SSO, example, bang, bang. And then I'm throwing that command, but it's now going up the updated code base in Azure. So it's just taking the changes that I've just made. We see those in action, and you notice the first time it's running, it's a little bit slower, but then you can see I've got my ears wrong. But I've then got running my example action, and I can see the changes that I've done in place. And that's a tiny little change, but you can see how quickly we can start making these changes. Now, obviously this has different benefits. If you're productorizing a bot, as we've done a little bit of times, you might not want to be making these changes at pace because it's a product, it might affect loads of clients. You've got a decent change management cycle. But if you're hitting client specific requirements, and very much that's the view of the world that we move into with citizen developers, Power Automate, where we're building logic specifically, but we're doing it at speed. You can see here just how quick that process is. Now, as I said, that's all very well and good, but really where my background comes into it is I want to see this with Dynamics. Now, a little bit of setting the scene. The way we do Dynamics, you can communicate with Dynamics via username and password, but that's increasingly becoming redundant. You typically have an app registered in Active Directory with a client ID and a client secret, and that's how we talk to Dynamics or Power Apps at the API level. And again, in my GitHub there's a little article on how that's done if anyone's not done that element before. But all being well, what we can look at here is I've created us another little action for get contacts. And this is very much more, rather than just a bit of stock text, I'm now looking at, right, I want to go away at Dynamics and get some data back. In my speak, and the way I've got this in the slides, it's an information bot. It's where I'm asking the bot for some information and it's going, right, here you go. So if anyone who's done a bit of Dynamics development will recognise all of this. I've tried to keep it nice and tried and traditional. Having a query expression, I want to get some contacts, I want to get some certain fields. I only want contacts that are linked to a certain account, and that account is the channel that I'm in. So that's where a little bit of the contextual element of Teams comes into play. And then I might want to search for some contacts and then output them into my team. And so I've got a little bit of code that effectively then says, right, get some contacts back from Dynamics, only contacts that are relevant to the channel that we're in, and then write them into a little list in Teams. There is various ways that you can output in Teams. We saw there with the example action, a message. What we're seeing here is a list. But there's a whole lot of what they call hero actions or hero menu cards, and there's the big adaptive cards as well. And it's worth bearing in mind there's a lot of different output options you've got with Teams, and some look very nice indeed to have a really good kind of channel communication rather than just stock text. But there we go. So I've got my action here. I've built up the code here to search for contacts. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. What I can then look at doing is jumping back into my Teams bot and going, right, I want to add a new command in there. So I've got my command there for contacts. What's that doing? It's running my little get contact action. And you can see I'm doing a little bit of prep there to then say, well, I'm going to use Dynamics for this. Please initialize me a connection to Dynamics, and please use my Dynamics client ID and my Dynamics client secret. It then also fixates that as the URL of Dynamics that we've got here, which is the URL of Dynamics, which is authorized by this particular client ID and secret. So we can see that in action. We've got my contacts there, and then we can go and see that in Teams. So I've already published this one in. It's a little bit of a blue Peter. Here's one we did earlier, but we're going to go and see that in Teams in Chrome, and then I'm going to go SSO bot, and then I want a list of contacts. Now, what that's doing is that's pulling back contacts that are connected to the company that is in turn connected to this channel. And that's obviously a little bit added value because I'm not just pulling back all contacts everywhere from Dynamics. And that's the crucial bit when we're looking at bots. The context of where we're running the command is crucial. We don't really just want to go, get me all contacts from Dynamics everywhere. We only want the contacts for, in this case, CRMCS. And then I pull back, so 5 contacts with a variety of different fields that we're then showing for each contact. And then I've done a little bit of logic in there, which then says, right, if you click on any of these, straight into Dynamics, open that particular contact record up for us. Simple little command. And one thing I've done there as well is just make sure that if I then do say, right, I want to do contacts, but I only want contacts that say have the word Jess in them, and therefore I'm going to get one contact pulled back from my company because it matches the word Jess. and there's a little bit of logic configured in here which then says, well, what fields are you going to search, what fields are you going to show when you get that information back. So far, so standard. Just a way of pulling information back from Dynamics and seeing that in action. And then you can see here how that filter works. So what we're going to do, that's obviously a bit of a Blue Peter example, but again, what is the benefit of you doing this via Visual Studio instead of, say, Flow or some other tool that we could use to pull contacts back from Dynamics? Because obviously there's lots of that. And really it's the speed of development and the flexibility of what we can do once we're in an element like Visual Studio. We'll see Power Automate in a few minutes, and that gives us a whole other list of options of what we can do in a low-code platform. But here we can look at what we can do with a code platform. And so what I can do is take my get contacts here, do that a little bit differently, and have a get records class. Now at this point, it's getting records back from Dynamics. It doesn't know what records yet, because it's a flexible piece of code that can do any particular set of records that are in some way linked to an account. So we've got a little fixate in there on it, making sure it's linked to an account, so the channel concept still works, but we're looking at any records that we might want to get and having a little way, effectively, of building a tool here rather than just a bespoke bit of logic. And what I tend to find that is when we're doing the kind of pro code element, what we're building is tools. So here I'm building a tool where I can get any records back from Dynamics and make that part of my bot. Whereas say when we look at Power Automate, that's when we're doing business processes that are very focused on a particular client requirement. So we're going to see that in action. So this one, not so much a Blue Peter jobbo. We're going to actually see this here and now. So we're going to do, right, we're going to do a brand new command. I'm going to say, right, I want to get tasks back from Dynamics. And then what I want to then see is I'm going to do my get records. Now for me, I've got that done as an action template. So I've got my get records. So I'm going to say get tasks. And then what table am I getting back from Dynamics? Well, I'm going to get my task table. How does that relate to an account? Well, I'm just using the bog standard field in Dynamics for regarding object ID. And then what I've got in here is a little simple one where we can do add a particular column and say what is it we want to see. So for me, I want to see the subject of the task. That's going to be, I'm going to leave that blank, so I don't really want a field name there. I do want that to be searchable. I do want it to be a title. Then what I want to see is I also want to see the owner of that task. So much the same way, I want that to be searchable too, and I also want it to be, actually, no, I'm going to leave that as non-searchable, turn that off as being searchable, but then I do want to see my description of my task. And that's going to be not part of the title that we're going to see come back, it's going to be part of the content. But again, I don't really want a caption to it, I just want to stick my description in Teams. So that then defines what my task is going to do. So then I'm going to be using Dynamics. So I see here, just like I did with my contacts one, I'm going to say, right, to Dynamics connection equal connection. So that's just prepping my connection to Dynamics. And I'm going to say use Dynamics, and I want my client ID and client secret in there again. And there we go. Now, just the way I've got this structured is it's expecting this action here. So then what I do is just say action equals get tasks. I'm just using a bit of type in there because I want very much a focused get records task based off a template. And that template is basically just saying, right, as a template action for our bot, we're getting data back from Dynamics. And we'll see that's a little bit again when we come to flow, where we have a template to run a particular flow. So I think I've got that just about right. So jobs are good if I've done my job right there. So I've got the only thing I want to do is make that plural, just because often it's going to return multiple tasks. So then I'm going to publish that out to the wider world. And then again, absolute beauty of this, the rapid application development, do me stuff, publish it in here, and then we see that in Teams straight away. And there we go. So then back to Teams and then see how that works for us. So I'm now going to go, right, SSO, tasks, and then I just want to, at the moment, just a list of all tasks back from my account. That'll be the moment of truth to see whether I've got my stuff right or not. And again, the first time this is firing up, it's very much like a .NET app. The first time it's a little bit slower. And then, yep, using my account earlier, I do have two tasks that are set up there. And so I've got my two tasks there, one for follow up a legal pack that's assigned off to Ali, and another one which complete a PID document which is signed off to Karen. And again, the functionality is exactly the same as we saw with contacts. I've got my task, I've got some details about it, I can click on it to go and interrogate that task in Dynamics. And so there, I'm effectively using the benefits of having code in Visual Studio, inheritance, and the flexibility to do what I want to do with these things, but then having that integrate directly into Teams and using Azure as a rapid application platform to do what I need to do quickly. And as we've probably seen from the code there, I can then flex it up a little bit, so then I can search for different things there. So if I said, right, I want tasks, but I only want tasks that have the word legal in them, and then I can go and find particular tasks, and then throw that out to my users and say, look, if you're working in a channel, you're working on a project or a particular client account, you want to find some information back from Dynamics, put this command in and you're going to go and find a task or a contact or an appointment or anything else we look for. And again, if we have like custom entities, we have custom business logic, we can easily add that into our bot at pretty much a rate of knots to get our bot doing what it needs to do and still keeping it flexible enough to care for what the user wants to get from that bot. And that's a sort of example of effectively taking coding and applying that very quickly to our Teams bot. Now, it's still code, so really what we now want to look at is now thinking, right, how do we actually then tie this into a bit of a no-code platform like Power Automate and see this behaving a bit differently where we don't have to write code to get our bot doing things, particularly when it comes to business processes where we might want a bit more of a structured approach to how our bot operates. And that's what we're going to be seeing next. Now we've got the nuts and bolts of publishing from Visual Studio into Azure and seeing that affect our bot in real time. Really what we want to think about is what can we do with this? What is the purpose of putting all this together to then start implementing business requirements? And really, whilst the code in our bot is great and it can do all sorts of different stuff and we've got the flexibility there, really the power is in connecting that to platforms like Power Automate and then letting our bot drive business logic that we build elsewhere. Historically in Dynamics that might have been like connecting up with workflow, but nowadays we're very much looking at the Power Automate side of things. And to do that, we can do it in these following steps. First of all, we can jump into Power Automate, look at like the different flows we've put together. So one thing I've just created just before coming in is then our client onboarding process here, which then represents a real business process that we might want to do with our clients. So I'm going to jump in and edit there and see this firsthand. Now there's a brilliant feature in Flow, it's absolutely amazing, where we can trigger flows from a HTTP request, effectively making a flow like a mini web service. And what that means is that, traditional workflow in Dynamics can trigger off maybe a contact record or something happening in Dynamics. Flow does allow us to do events from various other systems, but by allowing that HTTP request, we can hook it up with almost anything. In this instance, basically our bot is going to call this flow, but it could be any system that's capable of parachuting a HTTP request. And that allows us effectively to have a trigger from almost anywhere. One thing we do with that is that we have a kind of what format does the message trigger take. So we have a little bit of a technical barrier to overcome where we have a format in here. The easiest and simplest way to do that is generate a sample payload and then have like a sample payload that we can put in here and then drive the attributes. For me, my bot has a sort of standard lingo that it's going to send off to Flow, the biggest bit being the channel ID, because then it's going to go and find the account. And what I do with that is I jump back into Visual Studio, I've got that lingo in here, so I just go, brilliant, that's my message format, I'm going to make sure that's in my flow. And then that keeps it nice and consistent. So I've got a single way my bot can launch various different flows regardless of what the business logic is in them. And then I've got my actual business logic itself. And really the beauty of a no-code platform like Power Automate is that I can model this with my client, I can sit down with them, I can pass this off to application consultants, people who don't really care about all the technical mumbo jumbo about the bot, but just want to model this business process, do it in a graphic user format, engage the client, and as we all know with Power Platform projects, client engagement is the key thing, the key metric that will determine a successful project from a failed project. And really do all of that here in my graphic user interface, model all of that logic. So I've built a very simple client onboarding logic here that parachutes tasks off to different people, looks at if the client's put in public ownership, and if so, puts another task off to Molly Clark, and then sort of finishes off. So I can model my business logic in a real sort of kind of editable format, get it away from code, get it into a more visual means for us, but with the option then to trigger that from the bot itself. And to do that, we join the dots here. Every time we use one of these HTTP request flows, it comes with a URL, and that's effectively the address of our flow that we can get the bot to call to then trigger our automation. So I'm going to stick that on my clipboard. I'm going to jump back to my bot in Visual Studio and just add a brand new action that's going to be onboarding. So I'm going to basically give it a task in here, or an action even, that's then going to launch my onboarding process. And the biggest element there is I then jump into here and put the URL of my flow in there. So then I'm firing off my HTTP message in that message format we saw here, my runflow.json, to that flow. So the flow picks it up and then goes and triggers the automation off the back of it. And then what I might just be doing here is then put like a sort of starting element here, which is saying starting the onboarding. Got a little exclamation mark in there as well. So again, now I've rigged up an extra action in my flow, in my bot, sorry, where then I can go on call flow. But obviously here I'm using run flow as like a template. So again, I'm using code in the right way, building essentially a tool that I can put to use to call any manner of flows, put the request off the flow, get the response, automate my business logic through the use of a bot to allow users to connect that through Teams. So I'm going to publish that off. And then I'm going to jump, whilst that's publishing, I'm going to jump back into flow, use one of the absolute best bits of flow. I'm going to sort of test my flow here and we're all right, I'm going to test it manually. So then as soon as that flow is triggered by anything, or in my case, my HTTP request, it could be anything, I'm going to see that testing through the flow test harness here. Now, I think I'll finished. No, it's just finishing. So what we're then going to do, jump into Teams, call my brand new command, my onboarding command, and then hopefully see that fire into flow and see my automation taking place. Right, and that's in there. So I'm going to jump back into Teams. I'm going to flag up my bot, say, all right, SSO, what do I want you to do? I want you to do me some onboarding. So then we're kicking off that action. The action's then gone, well, all I'm really here to do is start this flow off in Power Automate. So it's going away and doing that. Once it's finished doing that, it'll post a little message saying, right, starting the onboarding. So it's triggered that off. And then I should be able to then see that in flow. There we go, my flow's running. So it's going, flow is now picking up the slack, doing its different operations. I obviously can then see exactly what it's got up to. So I can see my condition, I can see everything in place. And then one thing we do at the very end of this flow, once it's all finished, is I do fire off a little request back to my bot, a little notification off to it. And there's an element we're going to see next. But the practical outshot of that in Teams is then I've got right starting the onboarding, and then we notice my bot suddenly posts a brand new conversation into my Teams channel to say, oh, by the way, client onboarding is now underway. And then I can see elements of this. The main one, obviously, we can see what's happened in Dynamics, but because this is all about tasks that have been fired off into my client account here, I can then use my bot again, like we saw a little bit earlier, to query what tasks are against the account. And I can see we've got the two there we saw earlier, but I've also got a whole lot of other ones here, querying the best finance contact, sending the GDPR schedule and standard NDA, and reach out to agree engineering standards. Two of them for the owner of the client account, or the new client account, one of them specifically to Molly Clark, because she's the person who deals with engineering standards. And that's all the business logic, the real business logic, coming from my flow. And similarly, we can then flipping into Dynamics, we can see that in the reverse view of the world in Dynamics, where we can see those tasks all popping into life and see the fact that like my GDPR schedule and standard NDA there, that's been flagged as a high priority task because that's part of my business logic. And that's a way that we can really then see the code of our Teams bot, the sort of hardcore work we've done in Azure and Visual Studio, connecting to our low-code platform to implement real business logic and therefore get the best of both, get what Teams is good at and get what Power Automate is good at, all working together with the data layer in Dynamics and Power Apps. So now we have a bot that can launch various kinds of business logic by triggering flows in Power Automate. But it's fundamentally reactive. We ask it to do something and it goes away and does it. So one thing we're just going to want to cover off as we finish here is looking at how can we make the bot more proactive? How can we make it do things and go back into our teams as much as Teams calling out to something else? And to look at that, we're going to jump over here back into our flow for our client onboarding process. And we can see the different bits of business logic that we've tailored here. And at the very end though, we've got a little HTTP action, and take a look at what that does. That then has a means of calling back into our bot to go and ask it to do something. Now at the moment, what I've got this rigged up is a little notify controller, which is basically saying, right, bot, can you please go and post something into that Teams channel as a way of basically doing like posting a bit of a message or a piece of logic back into Teams. And the way that being done is that effectively our bot, like we've seen with Power Automate, all of these elements in the cloud are effectively these REST endpoints passing messages between each other. And as we've seen, we pass messages from our bot to Power Automate. We're doing exactly the reverse here, asking Power Automate, pass a message back to our bot. Our bot then interprets the message and goes away and does bits of logic. And we can see that in action. If we jump back into Visual Studio, we can see what this is really doing. It's taking out that message and then running it past an extra REST API here for the notify controller. And the notify controller then going away and going, right, I'm going to go and do something with that message and implement what I want to do. Jumping back into our flow there, we can see that we actually pass in the original conversation ID that we took into the flow initially. So we can see that then posting a message to the same conversation that was started with the bot when we asked it to do this command. And we can see all of that loop together, where if I run our client onboarding process in our bot again, we can then see this in action. So we can see the bot then going, right, I want to go run the onboarding process. It does the first message that the bot's doing to say I'm starting it, and then the last message there to the same conversation coming from that logic in Power Automate. And that allows the bot to kind of proact a little bit as well as react. What I just wanted to take a quick look at before we finish is also how we can use that in a couple of other different ways. So if I click into a different flow I've got here, what does our client onboarding process do? It creates a series of tasks. What we can then do is have another Power Automate that triggers for each task. So we're actually using the Common Data Service trigger here to then do a bit of logic and in itself post something into Teams to say, right, this new task has been created. I just want to alert everybody to that. And this is the element, whilst I'm not going to demo too much of that here, we can actually then tag people into that message as a way of push notifying people. So at that point, the bot is then creating push notifications to people to say, this new task has been raised, it's about this, it's in this channel, and then alert people to the work that we want them to do or to the element of a business process taking place. And we can see that in Teams here. We can see that we've run our client onboarding process. It's created 3 tasks and assigned them out, and each one of them could potentially become a new conversation in Teams. Obviously, I'm not sure I entirely recommend that approach. You don't want to overwhelm people with millions of conversations, but it's one way of alerting people to things that's happening as much as reacting to people asking things to happen, and doing that entirely through our bot here. And then one element to that is that if I then query those tasks using our bot again, now I'm just going to query some tasks there just about the onboarding process. I can then go, all right, brilliant, I've got my new sort of onboarding task here, query if we got the best finance contacts tracked in CRM. I've just done one little thing wrong there, do that. Query those tasks that we've got there. I can then pop them up, jump into CRM to then sort of pull that task up first hand, mark it as complete. That then tags the task as being complete, and what that will then do is then just to put another proactive message to that initial conversation about a task to go, right, that's now completed. So just as a way then of starting to loop the business logic together between the bot, ourselves, and Dynamics to then go, all right, a new task has been created, it's now been completed, and using potentially tags to notify people each step in the process. And that allows us to start not just having a bot just doing stuff on command, but having a bit of a free flow of information between our users. So the bot then becomes part of the teamwork we want to do. Some parts of that being the underlying wrapper in Visual Studio, but much of that coming from the workflow in Dynamics and the flows in Power Automate to have a kind of a comprehensive workflow system between the bot, the users, and teams. And that can be a very powerful tool to then help our teams collaborate with each other and automate common tasks. So to recap what we've done here, I wanted to bring up this slide again to sort of look at what our Teams bot's now capable of. We can find information from Dynamics, we can launch automation, and we can see notifications coming back into our team bot. So hopefully that's given an idea of just what's possible by hooking up the different bits of the Microsoft Cloud here and having this float around the orbit of Microsoft Teams as a platform for collaboration. Obviously it's been quite a technical session where I've gone through a few different concepts and indeed bits of code at pace, But what I want to reassure is that all of the source code we looked at today is freely available on GitHub, so we can take a look at that. And the environment we've been using here is a little Microsoft pre-sales environment, which I can make available to different people to log into, take a look at the flows, dynamics, and see the bot in action. Similarly, behind this, I've got a number of articles that either walk through some of the steps we've looked at today, or some of the other things that support to that, particularly attaching the debugger to my Teams bot, so we can step through that with a debugger. And hopefully then that's fired the imagination of just what's possible using Teams bots and how we can start putting this to use in our projects, particularly around what we can do with the Power Platform alongside Teams rather than being two disconnected things. So I want to thank everybody for their time, everybody who's gone through those sessions. Hopefully that's been a really insight into what's possible and some of the technological underpinnings. And hopefully, very much from my perspective, hope that we can see just how much, while some of the elements are technical involved in Visual Studio, it's not that dissimilar from some of the no-code customization we do, and that really development and customization, it's not that dissimilar when we start stripping it down into the individual concepts, particularly how the cloud makes a lot of this a bit of a leveler. It kind of really does connect bits of development and REST alongside the more traditional customization in Power Automate and Dynamics. So again, thanks everyone for the time, and I'm available for Q&A on anything we've gone through in this session. So don't hesitate to drop me a question, and we can see how all that folds together.